So this test will allow you to determine if there is an imbalance in the nervous system. It'll take you 5 seconds. And then in order to correct it, depending on what you're looking to achieve, simple eye exercises, which will cost you no more than 45 seconds per day, or even stimulating the skin of your foot with a fork, grabbing a fork and activating the skin of the foot. Most people will notice that one side is less sensitive or more sensitive than the other. That's also an indication of the brain. Right brain, opposite side of the body, and vice versa. So what we're looking for is complete symmetry, which is achievable. I know that it's very uncommon, but it's actually achievable. And you know what? I'll tell you what, I've never seen a case of pain. If there's pain, there's always an imbalance with the feet and the eyes. It doesn't exist. You cannot have pain without having an imbalance in the nervous system.
Hi, I'm Lauren Parsons.
And I'm Andy Jackson, and this is the ALWELLCO Podcast.
Dive deep with us as leading experts share their unique perspectives on topics such as recovery, sleep, movement, and the latest innovations in the space. So Annette, it's wonderful to have you on today. Before we get going into the podcast, I'd love if you just gave a little intro about yourself. How did you get into Posturepro? And then how did you find us at ALWELLCO, or how did you first start your journey here as well?
Yeah, so I basically have a background in rehabilitation, and I came across the idea of including a brain-based approach with my clients simply from the fact that I was failing on a daily basis at providing them long-term relief. So when I tried to understand or inquire or try to figure out the reasoning behind why the treatments that I was providing, although they were helping, they appeared to be repetitive, I felt that this was not something that resonated with the type of service that I wanted to provide. So to make a long story short, I simply started incorporating ways or trying to find ways to align the nervous system in the context of musculoskeletal disorders or any type of pain in movement, or just helping with longevity. Now, as far as your podcast is concerned, I've been interested in being in your podcast for a long time. And I did pressure my team to kind of hackle and then continue asking you guys if there was a possibility to just hop on. So I know that you guys really we're aligned in the same way of thinking as far as fitness and longevity and just global health. So for me, it really is an absolute pleasure to discuss with you.
I told you we're doing a good job.
The pleasure's ours, and it makes us feel really good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
How would you describe your background into Posturepro? Did you start out as a PT, or kind of what lens were you viewing all of this as you got started?
Yeah, so it was PT. The lens was biomechanics, and I quickly came to realize once I graduated, the idea was to start working on the body from a segmental perspective, which is what they teach us in school, which is great because it allows you to understand the functioning of the human body. But at the time, I didn't realize that there was no mention at all of the nervous system in the context of biomechanics. And to me now, I realize that this really is a missing link in the equation, because working on a segmental problem without understanding why the brain, we're going to exclude injuries from this, but traumatic injuries. But if we don't understand why the brain is shutting down that joint and we just simply work on the segment, it's going to be really hard to get long-term results, and it's going to cost the patient a lot of time and a lot of money just simply trying to manage their symptoms, which I find is really is not very productive.
Yeah. So Annette, taking that a little bit deeper, so a couple of things is that I'm not a PT or a chiropractor, so I'd love you just to explain a little bit more about what segmental means. I think some people will be interested in that. And then just take it a little wider. How does Posturepro integrate these principles of biomechanics into your approach in terms of improving posture?
Yeah, so I apologize. So segmental just means local. So for example, if someone has shoulder pain, PTs will be taught in school to specifically work locally on that problem, being the shoulder. But the shoulder, if we're taking the example of the shoulder, the segment, the local area of the shoulder can be influenced by the joint itself. So if you have a trauma, you fall down, then there's a physical trauma. But more likely than not, the position of that joint can also be influenced by different factors like the weight bearing on your feet, the way that your eyes are moving, and the position of your lower jaw, the way that your tongue posture is positioned, the way that you chew your food. All of those components can also affect that specific joint, which is what we are rarely taught in school. And what was the second question, Andy?
I just in terms of Posturepro, how are you like taking this approach in terms of biomechanics and into your methodology?
Yeah, so when you look at proprioception, which is basically a fancy word for describing how one knows where their body is in space. Well, that sense of balance comes from different body parts. And this is really well documented in neurological literature. So in other words, the way that we stand and the way that we move comes primarily from what I call sensory receptors. So different parts of the body that tell your brain where your body is in space so that you can move very efficiently and you can fight gravity efficiently. And that is your feet, the skin of your feet, the way that your eyes are moving. And both feet and eyes will have an effect on another part of the brain that is called the vestibular system, which is basically the inner ear. So the inner ear will give us a sense of balance, and the inner ear has an effect on a really interesting part of the brain, which is called the cerebellum. And I want to just simply very easily emphasize that the cerebellum will affect your erector spinae and your muscle tone. So these are things that are happening unconsciously. So rather than working on a local problem, example, the shoulder, and trying to fix the tissues here, I decided to go the other way around, work on the part of the brain that affects the muscles, the small little muscles, the intrinsic muscles that are located around every single joint in our body, and see if by using that pathway, can we also have an effect on the joint in question? And it turns out that we can. And this allows us to change the way that someone moves in space. It allows us to change their perception of where their body is in space. And it really allows us to activate their entire brain, their entire nervous system, because we're targeting specifically the primitive part of the brain.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd love to dive deeper on the brain-body connection.
Yeah.
I know the eyes are a huge piece, like you just mentioned, the vestibular system and so on and so forth. And we see this through concussion in, MTBIs, as to how much the eyes and or posture, ears, etc., have to do with recovery. Can you dive deeper for us on the brain-body connection in relation to posture correction?
Yeah, sure. So do you want me to elaborate a little bit on concussion specifically, or just simply how
I do. Definitely.
Yes.
I definitely do.
Yeah. So, what I found, I work with a lot of athletes, and what we find is if a concussion is going to happen based on a traumatic event, right, there's going to be a blow to the head. It can't be avoided. This is unfortunately the situation that they're in the sport that they play. What we found is if the athlete is better aligned prior to the injury, it will be easier for them to recuperate afterwards with the rehabilitation post-concussion. If the body is already misaligned prior to the concussion, then it's going to be much harder for them to get on the path of health afterwards. The eyes are the extension of the brain. If there is a blow to the head, then the movement of the brain can actually create a rotation from the cervical level at the level of the brainstem. And then that can create a lot of issues, additional issues with eye movements and eye tracking, which will create further problems with the vestibular system. I speak of the vestibular system because the eyes and inner ear are connected in the brainstem. So the way that the inner ear, when we move in space, when we move our head, the liquid in the inner ear sends that information to our brain, and it's coupled with the movement of our eyes, which has an effect on the tension of our neck muscles. So in the event of a concussion, that disconnection that occurs because of the blow to the head will further disconnect the eye movements. So the oculomotor muscles, which are the muscles that are attached to your eyeball, the disconnect will just be aggravated and will make the situation much worse. So the idea is, if we can avoid the injury, let's try to be as aligned, as symmetrical as possible prior to the injury. And this really applies to anybody, not just in the case of concussion. Because that ensures us that the nervous system is as primed as it could be, because there's nothing, what boosts and develops the brain is movement. And if you just inject a massive amount of sensory information to the brain, that's when we know that the nervous system is going to function at its peak capacity.
Okay. And then just quickly on the posture correction piece with the brain-body connection, is that in the form of drills? Is that in the form of foot sensory? How is that correction made by the brain and body, if you will?
Yeah. So if you look at the vestibular system, I like to divide the vestibular system in 5 parts. There's a part of the vestibular system, which is what detects linear acceleration. So moving up or down or front or back. And this is called the autolytic system. And that system, when you look at neuroscience, in every single human, that system never shuts off. It means that while you guys are sitting right now, our vestibular system is telling our brain, we're sitting down, we're not moving. The moment that we get up, the autolytic system is firing into the brain, and so on and so forth. So when I tried to figure out a way to stimulate the nervous system, I had to try to understand the different levels of muscular adaptation. If we look at the superficial part of the muscle versus the deeper part, and then the fascial system, what we realize is that if there's a muscle imbalance, so for example, if you have one shoulder that's lower than the other, or if you have a pelvis that's rotated, if I were to manually or mechanically work on that part of the body to try to shift your weight back or forward or up or down, if I were to do this on a table and then work on you for 30 minutes or an hour and then have you get up and walk out of my office, well, the muscle memory that you've walked into my office with would still remain. I would not actually be able to change that in 1 hour. And this is where it became really interesting for me to start working on a multi-sensory system for an extended period of time, which includes sensory from the feet, eye movements, which will have an effect on the vestibular system indirectly. So in other words, we're changing where the line of gravity is landing in between the feet. So when we stimulate the skin of the foot all day long, as opposed to just for 30 or 40 minutes during rehabilitation, all day long, and we incorporate that sensory stimulation with eye movements that are performed anywhere between 3 to 5 times a day for 30 to 45 seconds each time, that's when we're able to have that sustained sensory input to the vestibular system. Remember, the idea is to affect the vestibular system so that we can change the way that we move and that we can affect or improve our the way that we're fighting gravity.
So it's really interesting is that I know most people will be listening to this, they won't necessarily be watching it, but it's making me sit up more upright just in this conversation.
I was just going to say, it's a comment that I always get when I pass the border and they see on my passport posture expert, and every single
Everyone
time
sits up.
he kind of readjusts himself behind the booth, and we have a whole conversation about it. So it's really nice.
That's very interesting. So take this a little step further. It seems that you've got this unique process of how you the methodology around Posturepro. Can you take us through some of the sort of advanced assessment techniques that you utilize when you're diagnosing posture, to sort of more precisely, but then also at the same time, kind of give us a view of how you're differentiating that from more traditional methodology?
Yeah, so the first thing I'm going to want to determine is if the person is unstable. If there's an imbalance in the vestibular system, it's going to affect your sense of balance. And that is ultimately going to affect your posture from a biomechanical perspective, but it also affects your ability to manage your stress. If we're unstable in the nervous system, we'll be unstable between the balance between our sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. So the first thing that I want to look for is any imbalances. I like to start with a static assessment, meaning standing upright without movement, not lying down, standing upright. I want to get an idea of how the person is fighting gravity. Where is their head in relation to their pelvis and their feet? That's going to give me a great indication in regards to where they are at in their nervous system. And then I'm going to couple that with a couple of neurological tests, Romberg, Fukuda, which are basically tests that will determine if there is an imbalance preeminently in the eyes or with the feet. And I look at eye tracking as well. Eye movements, different types of eye movements to see if there's any type of convergence insufficiency, which is basically asking someone to look at a target that is really close to see if the movements of the eyes will be symmetrical from the left side to the right side. And then using this information to recalibrate. I like to use the word rewire the brain so that instead of functioning with a body that is misaligned, we train the nervous system through feet stimulation and eye movements to incorporate a new postural engram in the brain. And to do so, we do need a minimum of 10,000 hours, which is done by yourselves through simple repetition of, instead of functioning with a poor posture, you then go about your day with an aligned posture and repeat that movement on a daily basis for 6 weeks in order to solidify that new postural engram in the nervous system. So the assessment in itself will take no longer than 10 minutes. I can actually assess someone fairly quickly. I've done this so many times, and since 2006 that I'm pretty quick at determining what's causing what. And then the correction protocols are really empowering for the individual because they're able to see and feel the changes that are happening live. So if we're dealing with a healthy individual, sometimes we can correct someone's posture in 3 to 5 minutes. And then it's going to be about keeping those changes over time so that they become imprinted in the nervous system and stick with time.
So in terms of your assessment being, different to the more conventional methodology, would it be right for me to say that you're doing an assessment that's more related to some different techniques, but then you're encouraging people to do a lot of work on their own versus the magic wand of that 1 hour with the physical therapist and chiropractor is going to fix everything? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, a big part of it is that we use tools. We use therapeutic insoles to stimulate the sensory receptors in the feet. This is really the only way to create that stimulation. And the work that has to be done by themselves will cost no more than 1.5 minutes to 3 minutes per day for a minimum of 6 weeks to ideally a year. So yes, it's a good analogy in comparison to having someone just sit on my table or lie down on my table and I just work with them manually with my hands on their body for a full hour. With this method, because we're working with the nervous system, we never really have to touch them. The correction, we're giving tools to the nervous system so that the nervous system itself can auto-correct its own body in order to fight or improve that line of gravity. It always goes back to the line of gravity. If you can change that line of gravity, you're going to change the energy expenditure, which we can measure very, very precisely in our office. And the least movement there is within this line of energy, the more energy you have that's available to you for healing or just living.
Okay. And then is the 6 weeks or the 10,000 hours kind of mirror the role of neuroplasticity in this? Is that why that number is chosen?
Exactly.
Okay.
And we've seen it over and over again with force plate testing. This is where I see the greatest changes in posture correction and in muscle tone is at the 6 weeks mark.
Okay. As we were doing research for this episode, we came across a book called Slouch. Have you read it or seen it by Beth Linker?
I've heard about it, but I have not read it.
Okay. We were really keen to understand what your thoughts were on it, but we won't touch on it.
I can give you a little bit of the background.
Tell me. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, the background of it is that historically, before the start of the 20th century, is that people actually thought that slouching was a sign of your stature in life. is
Wow.
that it was seen as that. And then what changed it was, and this is quite sad really, is that people didn't want to be then perceived as being disabled or deformed. So everyone then started to say, you need to be upright, you needed to walk in that like a, it's probably a lot to do with Europe and the colonies and all that type of stuff. I won't get into the whole politics around that. But everyone then started talking about walking upright, and it was really, discriminative against it. But it was seen back in the day, and that was what her book was really about, saying that slouching isn't all bad in certain circumstances, etc. This upright posture is not all bad.
Do we know what year is she referring to in time? Do we know?
Well, so she said that the change of the, to this, let's say, more correct posture happened at the start of the 20th century.
Wow, I know. Now you've piqued my curiosity to read this
take
book.
A look.
I'm really
to us too.
I would love to discuss. I'm stunned at that. No, because so I can only. I'm just gonna try to reason that thought with logic. So when we're born into flexion, all of us. Right, a fetus is in a flexed state, and if we compare a baby to a giraffe, how long does it take for a giraffe to walk? Almost 3 minutes, and it'll take a human close to 12 months. What's the difference between the two is that the baby does not yet have access to the cortical parts, so the brain parts that are going to activate the muscular system so that the baby can actually fight gravity and stand upright. It just so happens that there's a part of the brain called the reticular formation, which is a part of the brain where when we learn how to move and we start to lift our head up and we stimulate that vestibular system, which will affect the cerebellum, which will then activate our back muscles. The role of the brain is to inhibit flexion and activate extension. As a matter of fact, 90% of the functions of the brain is inhibitory. Mm-hmm. The frontal lobe, which is what we develop from the back to the front as we grow, the frontal lobe is non-existent, is not activated in babies. This is why babies cannot reason logically like humans before the age of 8 years old, because the frontal lobe is not fully developed. Well, one of the roles of the frontal lobe is to inhibit the limbic system. So everything works by process of inhibition, and this actually occurs with primitive reflexes, which are basically these movements that are embedded in our DNA as humans, which are meant for us to inhibit those movements as we gain control of our muscular system. And it begins in the early stages of life. So when someone is aging, for example, Parkinson's disease would be the best example. When the brain, the nervous system becomes damaged or diseased, you see that they start to take that captocormic type of posture, that flexor dominant posture, going into flexion again, because I don't want to say they're going to die, but they're going back to the beginning. So for me, erect posture is a reflection. Fighting gravity efficiently is a direct reflection of the maturity of the nervous system. And we can correlate that with primitive reflexes in adults or even with kids and see very, very clearly the primitive reflexes that would still be active and the ones that would still prevent full maturity of that nervous system, because they do come with different symptoms as well.
That's very interesting. You briefly mentioned earlier insoles that you have, and I think they're patented. Can you go into that further? What are they? How do they help with posture correction at Posturepro? And are they structural? Are they like orthotics? Describe them a little bit more.
Yeah, so we did the full 360. I wanted to understand what happens to those mechanoreceptors in the skin of the foot when you were to apply constant pressure on them with different heights. And it turns out that if you use pressure that is greater than 3 millimeters under the skin of the foot, what ends up happening is that you're inhibiting the sensory input that the brain is picking up from the skin of the foot. So at first, the brain is feeling the pressure on the foot, and then that pressure kind of evens out and becomes null after time. And this is why you see with orthotics more often than not, and I encourage you to try with yourselves or with your listeners, if anybody knows anyone that has orthotics, or if you have orthotics yourselves, you'll notice that throughout the years, the height of the arch just keeps on increasing. That's because the midfoot is further collapsing with time because of the lack of sensory stimulation. Compare this to wearing a cast on your arm. If I were to put a cast on a body part and keep you, preventing you to use that body part for a month, 2 months, 3 months, when I remove the cast, the muscle has atrophied. If you don't use it, you lose it. So what we did is that we wanted to see if there was a way to stimulate those different sensory receptors and what were the stimulation that they responded to. And it turns out that they respond to frequency. And the frequency can range anywhere between 70 hertz to 120 hertz. But we wanted to find the optimal frequency. Was it at the toes? Is it at the heel? Or is it in the midfoot? And through experimentation, what we found is that 90 hertz frequency globally, generally speaking, had a positive impact on most people and gave them the sense of levitation. So in other words, unconsciously, it would activate the back muscles through the vestibular system. Remember, we're always working through the vestibular system by changing the line of gravity, which would cause the individual to realign themselves naturally. So our insoles are super thin. They're very, very flexible. You can literally fold them and make kind of like a ball with them. And they use a 90 hertz frequency to stimulate those sensory receptors in the foot to create that constant stimulation, which works while you're sitting down, by the way. So when you're sitting, you're also having the posture correction. Seeing nowadays, a lot of people are working from home. This was a component that we had already developed at the time before COVID, which turns out to be really beneficial now with all the work that's being done from home.
And is this something that you wear while you're injured trying to get back to true, or is this something that you would wear throughout your life?
So I hate stuff that's for lifetime. So they were not meant to be developed for life. They're meant to just give you a boost for the nervous system. But if you are injured, they will help you speed up with the healing of the injury. Remember, it's about reducing inflammation. If someone has an imbalance with their body, they're going to have a harder time healing because they have that constant source of inflammation in the body that's actually going to prevent them to heal at their fullest capacity. So the insoles will simply send symmetrical information to the brain. This is unconscious. The brain picks up this information and then projects back down the muscular commands so that you can have the most symmetry from the left to the right, from the front to the back. And in other words, so that you can fight gravity as efficiently as possible. And we can quantify this. And we actually have over 350 cases that we've used and presented at Harvard where we show the reduce in the surface and the movement within that surface with and without the insoles. And just recently with state police, where we showed with the same force plate reductions in blood pressure from wearing them to not wearing them, to grip strength and shooting accuracy. So those changes are there. They're happening at the speed of light the moment that we're using the frequency under the feet of a healthy individual. And the results will vary from one individual to the other, depending on where they are at in their health and nervous system. But we also have great effects with Parkinson's disease or different types of conditions where we can help improve certain symptoms.
It's quite fascinating. I think you know that we are massive fans of Vivo Barefoot and we're into barefoot footwear, and it's a lot of what you were saying there about, use it or you lose it, etc. We're completely on the same page as that. I have got one further question about those insoles. If you were to put them in, say, I won't name a brand because I'm not a big fan of denigrating any brands, but let's just say a brand that has very big padded outsoles, etc., you still going to get the same effect?
You will get, but they will be diminished.
It'd be diminished. Yeah,
I have tons of videos. I just don't have time to edit them. Testing actually what you've just described, Andy, and the results are there, but they're not as good as they would be with other shoes that accommodate the shape and the movement.
We'll take this offline, and Lauren may edit this bit out. But in terms of you should talk to the guys at Vivo Barefoot. It sounds like there's something that could be very interesting to work on together.
Yeah, I mean, I would. It would be a long. it's something that I've wanted to do for a long time, because I feel that if this was already, I mean, they're already putting inserts in shoes that are completely messing everything up. But you know what? I actually go through that testing with my clients. Once we go through the full correction, I'll ask them to come in with different types of shoes. More often than not, most people have those shoes that are really rigid and thick, and I'll just put the insoles in the shoes, and we'll retake the exact tests we just did, and people are stunned. They're stunned to see how the imbalances come back. They're not as bad, but they do come back. And the moment that you remove the shoe, boop, all gone. So there really is an effect there, and it's really, and I would love to of course, collaborate with anyone that promotes longevity and better health and foot health.
So let's take this a bit further then. I think this is all linked. Is that, can you explain the principles behind how you're using then acupressure and reflexology within your products, within your system?
So based on different several studies, you'll find there was a study that talks about how using different types of pressure or even frequency on different parts of the foot can elicit different types of postural responses. So for example, if I were to put a little edge on your heel only and put this under your foot, under 3 millimeters, just under the foot, and record the movement that's occurring with this specific individual, well, the height under the heel will push the person forward. And because you're feeling your anterior canals are now being over solicited of the inner ear, because you feel that you're moving forward, you'll actually pull yourself back. So using this information and trying to understand how we can use these different wedges on different parts of the foot can actually help us. And this is what I do in my private consultations. I don't actually sell this online, but on my private consultations, we can put different wedges on different parts of the insoles to elicit that different type of postural response, which sometimes is kind of like a boost, a little bit of a boost that we're giving that person, that individual, so that they can have better control and faster results of the issues that they're trying to resolve clinically.
So you've worked with professional teams like the New Jersey Devils, the 49ers. Are the techniques that you put together for athletes like themselves different? Do you recommend things that are the same as what we've been talking through, or is this whole process completely different if someone is a high caliber athlete?
You know, as long as I'm talking to a human, my protocol will be the same. What differentiates it is the state of their nervous system. So where are they at as far as their development? It's really crucial for me to determine whether or not they have retained primitive reflexes. And for the listeners, a primitive reflex are basically these automatic movements, involuntary movements that the body will do when you stroke a specific part of the body. So for example, if I stroke your hand, will it go into flexion? If I stroke your foot, will it go into extension or flexion? Those reflexes should be inhibited by the brain. And what I find with a lot of athletes, even at predetermining, because I talk to these teams and they have some guys that go out on the road to pick new and future athletes, and they go into different schoolings or colleges to pick out the different athletes. Well, one of the things that they have to look for are primitive reflexes, because that's going to tell you whether or not that athlete will have a harder time at succeeding in the sport. So I'm all about prevention. I believe that prevention begins with the mother before she gives birth, making sure that her pelvis is aligned, and then reducing the amount of time needed for the birthing process. And then once the birthing process happens, there needs to be a trigger in the nervous system that tells the brain that the baby is no longer in the womb. And that trigger is movement, a movement of the head, which is activated through the vestibular system, tells the nervous system that the baby is no longer in the womb. So movement is super important. And if we can take that to the beginning of life and then try to develop it as optimally as possible, I believe that we can create an era of superhumans.
Well, let's take that a little bit further then, because there are a lot of people who will be listening to this who are strength and conditioning coaches. They're working with athletes, they're working with teams, they are coaches. So are there any sport-specific posture considerations that they should take into account or they should be aware of?
So the easiest thing to do that will cost you the least amount of time is to look at eye convergence. So if you were to take a pen and put it on your nose at just 90 degrees and then kind of ask your athlete to look at that tip of the pen, what you'll see 9 times out of 10 is that one eye is looking at the pen and the other eye is looking at something else. So for me, that would be an indicator that there's already a pre-existing imbalance in the nervous system, and it has probably gone down to their weight bearing, to their feet, to the way that they walk and coordinate movement, and it's probably already affecting their vestibular system. So this test will allow you to determine if there is an imbalance in the nervous system. It'll take you 5 seconds. And then in order to correct it, depending on what you're looking to achieve, simple eye exercises, which will cost you no more than 45 seconds per day, or even stimulating the skin of your foot with a fork, grabbing a fork and activating the skin of the foot. Most people will notice that one side is less sensitive or more sensitive than the other. That's also an indication of the brain. Right brain, opposite side of the body, and vice versa. So what we're looking for is complete symmetry, which is achievable. I know that it's very uncommon, but it's actually achievable. And you know what? I'll tell you what, I've never seen a case of pain. If there's pain, there's always an imbalance with the feet and the eyes. It doesn't exist. You cannot have pain without having an imbalance in the nervous system.
If those same coaches wanted to implement the programs and testing that you just walked through, what advice would you have for them? I know there's specific programs probably you'd recommend over others. I'm sure there's wrong ways of doing it. What advice would you give?
Well, I would encourage them to look at the Posturepro method. One of the ways that I wanted to have an impact worldwide was to teach this method to different coaches or professionals, or really anyone looking to understand that concept of brain-based approach. We have different programs depending on the caliber that you find yourself in and what you're looking to achieve in your practice. But the Posturepro method really is the one that dives into everything we've been talking about here.
So you've obviously, seen a lot of people, seen a lot of clients, seen a lot of professionals. Are there some common misconceptions about posture correction that you see over and over again? When you do, how do you overcome them?
Well, the common misconceptions are that being misaligned or being asymmetrical is something that's normal. It's not. It's common, and we tend to think that this is something that is normal. And if there is a misalignment or an imbalance in the system, it's just a question of time before you get injured. Movement is what activates the brain and grows the brain. And you need to continue to move to stay healthy and alive. But if you're moving in that fashion with a body that's misaligned, you're literally working yourself out into injury. So how do I combat that misconception? Through education, simply by explaining the concept to whoever is willing to listen to it and actually showing them how it's possible to achieve better posture almost immediately by doing some of the things that we've been discussing here on the podcast.
So Annette, let me just take this a little bit further. So I'm a left-handed golfer. I'm a right-handed baseball player. I'm a quarterback thrower. Just by the nature of what I'm doing, surely that's going to create that imbalance, and the body has to adapt to that. Are you saying that you still don't want them to be symmetrical, even though they're spending a lot of time being asymmetrical?
Yes. So what you're describing is being ambidextrous. When we look at the way that the nervous system develops from birth to 8 years old and then 18 and 25 years old, what we find is that there needs to be a dominance in the nervous system, a right eye dominant, ear dominant, foot dominant, and writing dominance. When there's confusion, if the layers and the building blocks of the development of that nervous system are compromised for whatever reason throughout the growing years, what we'll find is, in some cases, some adults will end up being ambidextrous. An example of this would be someone who starts off as left-handed and who is forced to become later on right-handed. In terms of injuries, the way that I see this is that they will end up wasting more energy standing upright because there's confusion in the nervous system as far as that specific dominance. So remember, our goal is always to reduce the amount of energy that is spent. But from a clinical perspective, what we'll find is that the postural corrections will be a little bit more contradictory. So, example, they might be flat-footed and bow-legged. So flat-footed would be kind of an arch going inside. But if you look at their knees, they're bow-legged. So from a biomechanical perspective, this would be a contradiction. This is what I call a contradiction, because it's almost impossible to be flat-footed and bow-legged from a biomechanical perspective. These are the types of contradictions that I would find in the assessment, making it a little bit more challenging to make those correlations, but not impossible to correct with time.
Okay. So you're actually saying dominance is a good thing, but dominance does not lead to asymmetry in the body, which I think Andy was asking earlier with the nervous system left to right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry if I misunderstood. Yeah, absolutely. It does not lead to confusion. If anything, it's a good thing.
Okay. Interesting.
It's what we want.
I mean, this seems to me there's a big opportunity for people like me. I'm an ex-failed soccer player who ended up with a couple of concussions, etc. But what's interesting, I was taught to kick right leg the whole time. I was right centre back, kick with your right leg, move it left to right, etc. And still to this day, and it's been a couple of years, maybe decades, since I didn't play. Surely this is a market opportunity for then people to work with people to create that symmetry, to get them back to that, to affect. There's a whole new market opportunity here, surely.
Oh my God, there's such, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, that's just one field that you're describing here, but there's market opportunities for this type of approach for absolutely anything. I mean, if we just even look at longevity and how we can activate different parts of the brain just simply by optimizing blood flow to the brain and the nervous system. I mean, it's massive, especially that we're in the era of longevity now, which we weren't in 2006, right? Not a lot of people were talking at the time about longevity or even shoes or foot posture, or posture in general. But yeah, there's massive opportunity as far as incorporating a brain-based approach. It's something that's completely missed.
And then earlier you mentioned the nervous system, the direct link between the nervous system and pain. Does chronic pain differ with that? Is it just something that takes longer to undo? Are there any differences between acute and chronic?
Well, yeah, you're not supposed to have pain all day long. If you have pain all day long, then there's constant inflammation in the body. The best predictor of longevity is how well are you fighting gravity. Someone's posture, upright posture, can tell us a lot about what's going on inside their brain and their nervous system. And we all have these internal mechanisms that we've been talking about that are always operating: the feet, the eyes, the vestibular system. And energy conservation will occur if we diminish these amounts of oscillation. So when someone tells you that they have constant pain, you have to tell yourself, well, what's going on there? Why is there constant inflammation in the body? Now, what we find is we can link that pain to different sensory receptors. So I'll give you an example. If you find that we'll take back pain, for example. If you find that you will have lower back pain towards the second part of the day, so after 2, 3 o'clock, 4 p.m., 5 p.m., and you're exhausted, well, that pain is most likely caused by the receptor, the visual receptor, so the way that your eyes are tracking the world. If you tell me that you have pain in the morning, then I'll say to you, there's probably a temporomandibular joint. That's your jaw. There's probably an issue with the jaw, maybe the tongue, maybe the joint, maybe the muscles, maybe the teeth. That's for us to determine in a consultation. And if you say to me, I have pain all day long, well, you're probably clenching your teeth on a daily basis, which, by the way, clenching your teeth pushes the head forward, which challenges your center of gravity, which goes right back to how well are you fighting gravity. So chronic dysfunction in these systems, feet, eyes, jaw, vestibular system, will affect our stress response. And the hypothalamic pituitary, the HPA axis, which is basically the part of the brain that regulates your stress response and your cortisol. And we know that cortisol is the kryptonite of muscle mass. What makes us healthy is muscle mass, but what destroys muscle mass is cortisol, and what leads to cortisol is inflammation and stress. So it's kind of like a catch-22. And vestibular dysfunction always activates the HPA axis. It's always going to create stress in the body. So the simple solution would be, what can we do to have an effect right now, on the way that you are fighting gravity? Can we shift your body weight back just a little bit and create those changes? Can we monitor those changes, which we can? We can actually measure them through blood pressure. We can measure them through or see them through MRI, that those brain parts are being activated simply by shifting someone's weight bearing.
Wow, that's really quite interesting, quite fascinating. So what I think I'm hearing now is that everyone really should get involved in this. So, if, we've got physiotherapists, chiropractors, fitness trainers, strength and conditioning coaches listening to this. How should they be collaborating to address posture issues effectively?
Yeah, so I love that question. First of all, I want to say that those professions are great. They are a great add-on to what we do. What I'm proposing is to begin with posture correction first. If you're PT, osteo, chiro, or just simply in the fitness industry, making sure that your clients are well balanced and well aligned before you start any program, regardless of the type of program that you're doing or teaching, will always help you achieve your goals faster. And your clients are going to thank you for it. They're going to appreciate the fact that it's going to take less time. They'll appreciate the fact that they're going to get to their goal and reach their goal faster. And if you have a client that's happy, they'll refer you more people.
For sure. What do you see the future for posture, for innovation in this field? How do you see it going?
Wow. I have to pick the niche that I want to develop, because it's endless with some of the testing that we're doing right now. The collaborations that we have and the things that we're seeing is really mind blowing. I don't know where I'm going to head. My goal is to help as many people as possible. I'd like for people to know that these types of methods exist and are available. And I would like for anyone to have the choice to decide whatever is best for them. And hopefully just, creating new protocols, changing the way that the fitness industry is looking at musculoskeletal disorders and starting to incorporate a little bit more the idea of a brain-based approach would make me very happy.
Well, this has been fascinating for me. I'm dying to pick up my pen and look at where my eyes go. So that'll be one of the first things that Lauren might be doing in a minute. But I think, the theme of our podcast is strength, kindness, and perspective. So your perspective has been wonderful. You've shown a lot of strength in terms of your tenacity and getting out there and, showing your belief in Posturepro. Some kindness. Is there somebody out there you'd like to give a shout out to, whether a mentor, someone you want to give a leg up to, just somebody you'd like to show kindness to?
Well, the person that did challenge me and believed in me right from the beginning was Charles Poliquin. So I would like to give...
Oh, I know Charles. He's such a lovely man. Yeah.
He had so much knowledge and tips to give me just to be where I'm at today. So I do want to thank him for believing in me, although he did give me a hard time at the beginning and it was really, really hard to get the feedback. But I see this as constructive feedback from him. So today I wouldn't be where I'm at if it wasn't for the things that he's helped me with. So a massive thank you goes out to Charles Poliquin.
Just quickly before you sign off, don't forget to visit network.allwellco.com and join our professional network. You'll get to enjoy exclusive benefits from brands we love and have access to a community where learning and professional development are always at the forefront of everything we do.